borders. We live within borders. Borders are important, they mark difference, and they are important for any identity. So we think and experience in terms of politics, in terms of life, and in terms, of course, of performance in and between borders, in terms of time. There is a beginning and an end, in terms of framings and in terms of space, territory, and processes in between, and deterritorializations, movement and migration, all connected with borders, and the question as well that borders might, if we sense them or experience them as obstacles, might create and getting emerged another dynamic as well, and create something else than that would be expected. So I have, in my mind came, when I thought about this question, interweaving and borders of interweaving, two little images. The one is from Franz Kafka. He had a little story, it's called The Bridge. And it's about that. A man is going into a landscape, and this landscape is not yet mapped. And then he comes to a place where is a deep valley and there is no bridge. And he decides to be the bridge. And he lays it himself over the big gap, and there are persons passing over him as a kind of human bridge. And then he is torn by fear, standing that, and he thinks, what if I would turn? And so it came to my mind, borders, and the question of that implicates the in-between and the Metaphorein, the metaphor as a bridge, but as well the revolt. If you turn, you're in a revolt. And the second idea was that in my mind came the idea, or the theoretical idea, which Michel Foucault makes when he writes his preface, his foreword to Bataille, to transgression. He thinks, what is transgression? To make a step over borders, of course, and this transgressive moment is not only a step over borders and being something else or doing something else, but it shifts the space of liminality and changes the border. So there is a transformation of the border as a liminal thing or a liminal place. And so he speaks even of an enrolling. And I think this metaphor of there's something of an enrollment which goes and goes back in question of border and the movement which is triggered out of that, very interesting for perhaps thinking or recollecting what had been there all the time in this ongoing Congress. So for me, and this is, I will close with that, if I connect this to what I experienced in this Congress, there were the Motion Bank and the archive, the Pina Bausch archive, where I thought, yes, for me it was a transgression of borders and going somewhere else, because this kind of taking information coming from movement and from an archive or a knowledge and a heritage of dance or of movement, and bringing that and informing it into another form, transforming it through a new visualization and bringing it into a program. For me, it revolves my idea, my old-fashioned idea of archive and how I work in archive, because I can see that I even do not know how to use or how to go on and what it opens and how it shifts the borders of my thinking as a researcher and in a scholarly work as well, as it could be and inform new and creative works in dance and in the dance field in a practical sense. So for me, this is a feedback I want just to put in this space now to you, and then ask André as our panel speaker, how was it for you, or what are your ideas?
Okay. Can you hear me? Is it? Yeah, it's on. Yes, maybe I was thinking that maybe I'll follow up with the question of borders, because I thought that maybe my reactions could be organized in 3 chapters. One would be, chapter 1 would be discipline, chapter 2 would be mediation, and chapter 3 would be politics. And these would be titles for my experience around these 3 days of the Congress. But picking up the first one, which has to do with the question of discipline, has to do with, something that could be called perhaps dance studies, right? This discipline of dance studies. And what I find interesting is how this question of the panel, the title of the panel that gathers us right now, is very affirmative, interweaving dance cultures, but the subtitle is an interrogation, limits of interweaving, right? And immediately I thought it echoed me this something that happened with Umberto Eco, right? When he writes in 1962, The Open Work, in which there's a kind of political emphasis on the participatory aspect of the reader, right, as the one who will complete the artwork, and also for this kind of endless semiosis, the endless capacity to break the discipline of literary, well-behaved spectatorship, right? And then in 1988, so this is Umberto Eco in 62, there's a kind of rebellion against the kind of disciplinary or disciplined ways of reading and addressing artworks. But then in 89, he writes a book called The Limits of Interpretation, which is exactly this thing, when he says, hold on, because if we interpret too much, we go away from interpretation into delirium, right? And therefore, we have to set up boundaries to interpretation. And even I, Umberto Eco, need to do this in order to guarantee the discipline of hermeneutics, right? So I was thinking about the question of discipline and indiscipline in relationship to this kind of delirium that happened in these 3 days, in which we have performances, we have panels that collapse one upon the other. We cannot actually attend all of them. We have to rush from half of one to the next one. And there's a kind of indiscipline in this kind of dramaturgical choreography of the Congress, which I find absolutely important. Because if delirium was a problem for Umberto Eco at a certain moment in the late 80s, more or less at the same time, in 82, Deleuze and Guattari are writing in Introduction of 1,000 Plateaus, delirium as a method, right? Precisely, delirium must be a method because delirium is that which is always engaged in a landscape, a territory, corporealities, and a capacity to connect that which is not supposed to be connected, right? So for the future of a discipline called dance studies, and in the American situation, maybe there's something that maybe later we can talk about. But there's still, I always feel that dance is something that has an affect of feeling always threatened by its possible collapse. And in terms of affirming a kind of discipline of dance studies, there's always been things like, how is it that dance studies affirms itself as with borders, a well-bordered discipline, right? And it seems to me that something that was amazing in this Congress is the cracking of the borders, the affirmation of the possibility of unexpected encounters, and this for me is fantastic. So I really appreciate this. But having said that, there's something then that we can think about this method of delirium, which is very close to me to my understanding of dance dramaturgy. So when I'm thinking about mediation, I'm thinking about dramaturgy as another theme that went through the whole 3 days of the Congress. And I was thinking about something that just happened in this room a few moments ago, which was the conversation between Guy Couz and Charkaoui. And Charkaoui said something really beautiful about his method of composition, because he proposed what he called an ethics of selection, right? And this ethics of selection has to do with a care as a way of working, right? How is it that you institute care as a way of working, right? How is it that you're careful in this ethics of selection, right? And it seems to me that one of the things that this kind of cartography, this kind of slightly, I also like that even though we are in Germany, nothing started on time, which kind of collapsed the whole idea of cliché, right? Of kind of subjectivity of German whatever. But so and that also propelled us to be even more selective about, and taking care and attending and waiting and be patient. So there's something that was really interesting about this, which borders perhaps to a kind of indiscipline, but I find it absolutely essential at this point. I'm talking about the dramaturgy of this. But going less meta and more into the content, also in the conversation before about dramaturgy and the kind of interaction between the dramaturg and the choreographer in the process of composition, Guy Cools, he actually brought back, the question of taste and judgment. He brought back, with a political implication, of course, which is to say, he was talking about a kind of hierarchy of, he called Western modernist, but I guess he's talking about, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a kind of contemporary sensibility in which all of a sudden it seems there is a reaffirmation of a kind of Western aesthetic values, even within the kind of globalized multicultural condition, and that seemed to be a little bit of a danger, and it seems to me that all the performances that at least I saw somehow address that issue, the necessity of rethinking value at the moment of neo-global post-financial catastrophe, right? This kind of a moment in which the question of value is pressing, and judgment as well. And the last one has to do directly with this question, which is the question of politics and dance, which is one that I'm particularly, it's something that I've been dealing with. But I liked also how in this Congress, at least in the panels that I saw, the emphasis was on the question of agency. And the agency was related to the figure of the dancer, right? I know the definite article before the dancer is already complicated, but I'm just, I'm just using the grammar correctly right now. So the figure of the dancer as the political subject that actually could, within systems of control, within systems of discipline, could actually, even in the most tyrannic situations, could always find a way to exercise agency and therefore to perhaps occasion the unexpected. So there were several themes and several panels around this, and to go back to what I said before, what I found particularly interesting and very, very important for something that we could call dance studies is that there's a few panels actually in which very few people involved had anything to do disciplinarily with dance. We had sociologists, filmmakers, architects. People could start by saying, I know nothing about dance, but I'm here, someone invited me, so this is my contribution. And this kind of presence, I find it very, very important for thinking about possible ethics of selections and occasion these encounters. So, these are just some opening remarks. I don't want to take too long, but yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So perhaps Susan, you go on.
Wow, Andre, that was impressive. And you already maybe have reshaped some of my comments in your comments. And I think what I want to talk about is something that I sense as a border within the discipline of Tanzwissenschaft or dance studies. And this is something that I've been sensing over the last few years and have sensed also in leading in the US a Mellon-funded initiative called Dance in as the Humanities, which is designed to sort of break down borders between dance and other humanities, Geisteswissenschaften. So I want to pose this for discussion and I guess pose it for my own reflection here. So what I've felt here and over the last few years, and maybe less here than over the last few years, so that's maybe the interesting question, is a divide between some of us who've really become preoccupied, even obsessed with this question of the racialization of the body in performance. And I think this is related to questions of the gendering of the body in performance, the queering of the body in performance, but this real attention to try to sort of interrelate social identities and power relations on stage to social identities and power relations off stage. And then on the other hand, I feel that there's, again, within this field of dance studies, I think there's many of us have become obsessed, and preoccupied over the last few years with sort of interrelations between performance and philosophy and questions of embodied knowledge, cognition in the body, questions of presence and absence, questions about the status of the document and the status of the archive. And I think what's fascinating about your comments is that you were really going from one of those poles to the other, which I think is really showing us maybe an interesting way to think beyond what I've felt as a divide. I guess what I want to also say here, and this just has to do with the construction of a discipline, do we say, look, there are always more ways to approach or interpret or analyze or research, any subject of inquiry. And so isn't this wonderful that there's one conversation among a group of people thinking about the racialization of the body and performance, and there's another conversation really investigating embodied knowledge, for example. So that, like, okay, this is what a discipline is. It's, many different people bringing different approaches, different questions, different methodologies, theories, different borrowings from other disciplines, different minings of our own discipline. And that's maybe one way of seeing that. I think you're bringing a third way. I think you kind of maybe resolved something that I'm about to say. But then I think then another way of saying this is saying, look, if some of us are really thinking about embodied knowledge and some of us are really thinking about the racialization of the body and performance, we've really got to bring those conversations together. And maybe there's really a debate there. And maybe it's going to be a kind of intense debate. I mean, we've had some intense moments, I think, in this conference around those questions, and those have been some of my favorite moments of the conference, actually. So, and again, that's what a discipline is. A discipline is people who come together, share a passion for inquiry, share a subject of inquiry, and engage one another in debate and dialogue. So, and again, maybe your movement, shows us a different way or not, or maybe now we begin to, what are the different ways that we can work between these two poles that seem so powerful in the field and present here as well.
Thank you very much, Susan. I think this question, discipline in or inter and transdisciplinary, and as I like that very much because Disertot brings it up as well, this indiscipline, which means in between, but as well not, or anti a little bit, be an indisciplinary being in between. I like that very much. And in a way self-critical, I just think, we have there a panel, and it is discipline. Even if we do not, we try to talk about borders, and we have a scholarly recollection, and trying to be in discipline here as well. But fortunately, we have one dancer. Just only one, but perhaps we should have more dancers in this panel. I say that because it was kind of not easy, and so Navtej is here as a dancer and a thinker of dance and a worker in the field of both, and so I'm really happy that this indiscipline means as well to go between what we do as scholarly researchers and just going back, and even as you do, we should go onto the streets and not only sit on the carpet. So thank you, and please, you're earlier. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Am I on?
Yeah.
And thank you because it brings me back to the fact that I'm a practitioner, I'm a dancer, and that's the only place I know, so to speak. The whole thing of borders, to me, borders operate on various levels. And there are these physical borders, but there are these real borders within my head, which arrest me, so to speak. And these, I can even kind of, begin to locate them into the isms that I personally have kind of gone through, and these are basically colonization, nationalism, capitalism. And each of these control systems somehow implicate me in my own loss of integrity. Not only in my own loss of control or power, but my loss of integrity. There's like I tried to speak this morning, there's a shift in premise. There was a shift in premise when India re-envisioned itself. And I am implicated into that shift of premise, even if I don't believe in it. I revolt against it, viscerally. but I am part of it. There's a shift of premise, like I said yesterday, I said yesterday in this session that we are all kind of hopefully awakening to this, to the fact that we've all been had. We've been seduced into things, and this capitalism seduces me all the time. It comes into my bedroom and seduces me with those images. It's like, literally. And it implicates me into doing things which I really loved. To me, your talk on the animal thing was really, really, one of the highlights for me. And I'll maybe come back to it. Because, I'm also an animal activist, and what's happening to the animals today in this world, I mean it. It brings me down to my knees because I feel so powerless over them, over the torture and the cruelty that they're being put through. And we can talk about that later. But it really brings me down to my knees. To really realize powerlessness and to accept that powerlessness. I think it's a time for also accepting that there is control, but the freedom also lies going through this acceptance of powerlessness. And let me just go back to what I was saying earlier. So this whole thing of nationalism and, which tells me to put my best foot forward. And it's so tiring, and it's a lie. And it also kind of talks about, to kind of constructing yourself vertically, higher and better, and a star and a superstar and the best, and it's this thing, and and that's exactly what I'm so glad about interweaving, that it is allowing this vertical ascension to collapse and spread this away horizontally, because today I feel my redemption is in horizontal connections. And horizontal connections which are deliberate, but which, of course, just because they are random, they bring out chance insights, which I value more than anything else, than all the knowledge and the stuff that I have under my pocket, because these are real, and they make me real, and they make me connect with real people, with real issues, and it also connects my philosophy with my reality. And I also, I feel the time has come for me that there are these control systems, these are grids placed upon us. There are these grids. And we cannot fight these grids. We can only fight them by counter-gridding them. And counter-gridding means horizontal cross-connections. Minor, major, small, big, insignificant, ordinary. Not superstar, but ordinary cross-connections. So I'm really glad that this whole thing of interweaving has come up, because it's allowing people like me to step down and spread out horizontally. I think, let me see if I have anything. Yeah, just to kind of mention a couple of sessions that brought out some of these things. One, of course, as I said, was yours, because these are all these isms that I'm talking about. They all work on conspiracies. There are these secrets, and you begin to believe them, and you begin to live them, and you begin to fashion yourself. Like if we were the colonized subjects, you were the colonizing subjects. You were made to behave in a certain way, to look a certain way, so that we can say, wow, they look and sit and eat like that. So there are these conspiracies of, and today, just to give you a very concrete conspiracy, I'm coming to animals. There's a conspiracy to not, to institutionalize violence, and maybe it's a human need to institutionalize violence against the other. And today, the other is the animal, and we are blindly institutionalizing. Like even have to wear when I have to buy leather shoes, I have to really see where they are made. So if the animal was killed well, or was that skinned alive? Because that's a practice today. For leather, skinning alive animals is a practice for fur and leather. So, and these are conspiracies. Nobody knows about them because what we wear is like nicely packaged and beautifully, So I'm sorry, I'm getting too excited now. But the thing is that it's like interweaving is horizontal, holding hands to start speaking. It's a fight against conspiracy as well. And not, speaking in the most articulate manner, but in the very, it's like, when you come out of shock, like in India after partition, when people went through this Holocaust, literally, of the partition in India, and they came, for years, nobody spoke to each other because they didn't trust, and slowly they started saying, where are you from? What happened to you? So it's like this slow release and the trust coming back, and then, so it's to me, I think forums like this, where people from non-dance disciplines come and are invited, it's really like, it's like cross-connecting in a far more humane way, which would, kind of clear the webs, literally, the webs in my head, which are the borders. Because these webs are tightly, as I said, everything that I haven't been able to resolve in my head, where I'm implicated in the loss of my integrity and I can't come out of it, is a border. It's not just a border, it's a resting border. It does not, so these are the kind of borders that, we also have to deal with today, not just physical borders, but stuff that we can't free ourselves from because we are implicated. So, thank you.
Thank you. That's the implicated, and it's there as well. But as you say, there is not only a grid, but there is this kind of weavings and this connecting, which does not mean there is no border or no difference or always harmony. That's not the problem you talk of, but it's about truth and about there are ethical questions as well. Yeah. Sabine.
It's going to be hard to contribute anything more to this, but probably I'm going to talk about something that I'm trying to still resolve, and that was yesterday in a lab where we tried to discuss the post-colony and cultural policy, and that lab just failed. And I was moderating the lab and sharing it, and so I was wondering yesterday and also this morning what went wrong there and what was the outcome, and it was a lab where Faustin and Nikula, Cathy Noel, Schwarz here from Tanzhaus and Dance Dialogues Africa were on the panel. And the outcome and the frustration, and that's maybe what I want to share, seemed to me to be that despite the fact, and it's been acknowledged with my colleagues, that we arrived at a moment in contemporary dance where, yes, there is something that's a new ethics or ecology in terms of how dance practices engage with various cosmologies, where indigenous practices of anchoring the body to a specific geography, which for me came through in the panel on the South Pacific, actually, in the Banaba Islands, and was really fascinating, where the woman talked about, just she showed us the map of the South Pacific, and the world looked so different from that perspective that I never get to see on TV, for example. And I think it's also quite similar when we look at Faustin Nikula's work and the Congo, and we get confronted with a world that, from our own experience, we know very little about, most of us, including myself. Even though I've been doing quite a lot of research, I still feel that I cannot really share the experience, even though I'm trying to engage with that. And so then trying to organize something to talk about cultural policies, I found myself in a place where I found, Sabine, you're quite naive. You can't just sort of invite these people and have that kind of conversation, where Faustin then just got back to me and said, I'm very frustrated with this. It doesn't exist in my country. Our government doesn't support the arts. I'm on my own. I'm trying to build a center in Kisangani. What are we talking about? And yes, I appreciate the kind of acknowledgement that we're getting, the opportunities to perform in the festivals, but we're still in colonialism, and what are you talking about with the post-colony here? And yes, blame on me. I felt really bad, and I probably should do. So moving on from that, and if we think about interweaving, if interweaving is something that takes place aesthetically, and I think we've seen that in a lot of contributions in the Tanzkongress. And I think it's also wonderful to see how dance studies debate, academic discourses, are trying to meet with the practitioners, and these dialogues also with Sidi Lavi Sherkawi and his dramaturg. Really, they do present models for collaboration that could present a new politics. How do we translate that to our politicians? And I think that's still a big question. But as you're saying, the blocks in our heads and capitalism and the isms are the things that we're trying to grapple with in the arts that we're doing, in the kind of teaching that we're doing, in the kind of textbooks that we write. How do we translate to our politicians? And I thought your example with yoga and how your yoga practice translates into your art, into an activist project with school children, I thought that was a wonderful example that reconciled me with my frustration yesterday. I was like, you don't need to come up with this big frame, which was misplaced. I apologize again, maybe for the post-colony title there, because that's where we probably need to start. And I think that's a very embodied practice. That is something where your own dance practice, which is also an ethic practice, and yoga is a fantastic example, where that kind of energy, and I think Sidi Lavi Sherkawi is also a good example of that ethics that just communicates through the way that he shares his work with people in an open way. I think that's where we need to start individually, and on that smaller scale, we can hopefully translate that more broadly. And I think that's what I took away from the Congress, and I wanted to share with everybody, because I felt, usually I don't really like admitting to something that went wrong, but at the same time, maybe sometimes that's what you need to do, and just realize that your own naivety in some instances, because I guess that's also a place to start, because we still do have these differences in experience. They do exist, and yet we're also sharing certain human experiences, and we're all, I guess, trying our best, but these sort of misunderstandings are part of the thing, and where we can move forward. And I think that's part of what translation can hopefully involve in the future.
Thank you, Sabine, so much, because I think this is really important. Thank you for being so honest and not only talk about what works, but things who work, who don't work. And that this has a place in our finding and experiences as well, and that it's not always about just fulfillment or just going on, and or what you said, higher, better, more efficient, or things like that. But there are these blockages and these greeds and these borders who are obstacles or whatever, and where we fail. The failure as a part of this kind of connecting, which does not mean that there are not gaps or differences. And so thank you very much. And I even could just put up one of the cards who really connects to that, and perhaps you want to say something, or perhaps the person who wrote the card as well might be addressed or wants to say something about, because there's a written translation needs time. And you addressed it, so it's already at the table for preparation, for exchange, for digestion, and so I think we are going home and I have a lot to digest, and for rediscovery or recovery, both of that. So I make two words out of that, and I think this is really something which is an important feedback, and we can take that. Does anyone want to say something around that? Yeah.
I have to say something about it because it was my card. And it also related to the lab that Sabine just mentioned, because she puts all the blame on her right now regarding the event yesterday, but actually my and our responsibility for this event, and also the failure of the event, is not to neglect. I really had the impression that in this case we had an idea that was actually, and an excellent group of people there who had a lot of things, important things to say, who actually also did say them. I wasn't there for the whole time, but who did say very important things, partly as a attack and critique and reaction, emotional reaction to language, particularly because we had announced this lab in a particular way with certain terms, maybe also not really thinking about what they would mean for the individual participants. And then regarding my call for time, there was also not enough time for a direct exchange right before this lab. So we were really bringing people together with an idea without having the time to discuss the idea with the invited persons. We asked Sabine to moderate a talk that we had conceived. And in a way, I'm glad that she yesterday refused to take over the function of a moderator, even though the situation was horrible, I think, for her, for me, for those who came from Mozambique or from Benin to be there with us and discuss. But that's why I said I need time to digest that event, but I also think that time would have made it possible to use this situation productively, which was not there, unfortunately. So that's why.
I guess am I on? Yeah. I'm sorry I didn't get to that panel, and I was having coffee with a good friend I'd not seen for 20 years, going back to your, holding hands and holding and dropping and picking up the hands again, joining hands again after 20 years. But again, I just, I want to say publicly, and, at the panel that Reggie Wilson and I did too, there was, some very emotional response from the audience about, how are other people seeing racialized bodies and assumptions and such. And again, I just think these are the most powerful moments. This is what we really learn from. This is how we move forward in doing our work. So again, I just cannot reiterate that enough, how important these moments of miscommunication are as well. So just wanted to reiterate that.
Can I add something? Because I was thinking it does require time, but it requires perhaps, I'm not going to say even more, but equally, the capacity to be receptive, right? Translation requires receptivity, absolute receptivity to the other, right? And I was thinking about this notion of horizontality and sharing and breaking borders, and also the question of failure, which is a word that I really don't like, because you fail in relationship to a success, an ideal success. What would be the success of this event? I don't know what that is, but perhaps one way of thinking about its failure would be to think about that the event keeps going. It hasn't finished. Its time is not over yet. It actually keeps going. It has a kind of ontology or a virtual body or a subtle body, or to use other words that were here. And it keeps going, and therefore, how is it that we can remain receptive to that which was not, didn't take place that we were expecting, but perhaps could take place in another place, right? So we return to it again, we do it again, we dance it again. So in that sense, maybe this would open up even for more horizontality, less borders, even. I don't know, just a emotional reaction.
And perhaps because we thought in terms of borders and framings, one even could put it back and not just spot it onto a panel which was just a panel and had not enough time, but think that the whole Congress, and then I think it is productive and nothing else, because it started already with, and this is really thanks to the organizers, with a decision to have this piece, La Création du Monde, and this kind of questions all in that, which we all took and had really to chew and to digest and to carry through the whole Congress. It was really part of all our discussions. It was present, and it had another time, and it went already for me, across the borders of the different formats and panels. In a way, it was there, and so I'm sure it will go on, and it will be a kind of what we take, and which will have consequences, whatever that will be. It will, in this sense, there was a transforming or a dynamic process, and that does not mean always that it is already ready. Yeah, so I'm really glad of that, and I want to thank the organizers for that. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. This is all beginning to sound like post-coitum sadness. Can we bring some happiness back into this?
So the animal. Every animal.
I wanted to say something that Andre, with whom I found a very deep affinity, he doesn't know this, but I feel it. I wanted to just pick up something that Andre has already touched on. I would like to develop in the framework of how do you get over post-coitum sadness. It not only takes time and receptivity, this kind of translation in which we're using the word in a very complex sense, aren't we? Going across cultures, going across peoples, horizontals, languages, religions, ethnicities, going across all this and somehow eliminating it. At least eliminating it in a kind of utopian space, which is the space of receptivity that you're talking about. But more than time, it requires risk. It requires the openness of risk-taking and of daring to say and to think and to feel. And it requires a kind of generosity and openness of generosity. So let's think about the happy part of it. Not that I'm particularly happy-clappy, but you know, I'm very optimistic about life, despite the fact that I think most of it has been shit. You know, let's wade through the shit to something positive, because if we don't, we're going to be not only be had, as you put it yesterday. I wanted to add to you yesterday, Naftij, and say, more than being had, we have been screwed. So that's all. That's it.
Well, I have here another card, and I think perhaps we could, it addresses something which was very present in this Congress and is already really a topic for quite a time, and it's about dance. I read, when and where for a dance performance of experienced elder dancer or dancers and choreographers. So, of course, this was a topic and is a topic, and since I'm not sure if there is the idea or the wish to talk about that again, but perhaps someone wants to, who wrote the card, to elaborate or say something around that. Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the board, for all your work, what you have done, all the preparation. And I was very deeply touched. I'm a dancer choreographer, to find people, dancers from former times, which have so much experience in dancing and in their profession to teach. And it would be wonderful to found a gremium where these people come together and dance and give the elderly, the non-elderly and the youth a new perspective for their life. I make now the distinction between elder and young because the young people have the same problem than the elderly people. And it would be wonderful when it is not lost this time, and that it would be in Germany, I have found it in the States, that there are groups who find together and can perform together and bring their potential to the young people, to the elderly people, and enjoy and make much joy what dance is from, I think, from the vertical to the horizontal, and from the horizontal to the vertical.
Yes, thank you so much. So you, in the US, Anna Halprin, or you have these wonderful dancers who just live it and who really show us, give us question, but that does not mean that it is not a hard question. It is a hard question, what you put up as well, and encouraging, very encouraging. Is there, because there were panels, there were talks around that, is there contribution? Nanako, perhaps, yes, you.
Yes. Yes, I talked about aging and dancing, and then I appreciate that they programmed my theme in this Tanzkongress. And then, because it's just like a big taboo in dance studies, and even though like it's a kind of main topic in Japanese theater studies, but it's not really integrated into dance aesthetics yet in a Western sense. So I appreciate this curations and programming, but at the same time, I feel the aging sessions go parallel with the contemporary dance discussions. So like we have to choose one of the sessions in order to find out what's going on. And that sometimes I find it a little bit confusing, because I know that this aesthetics of aging, it could be a part of the contemporary dance scenes. And then, but at the same time, we have to choose which panels to go. That means the aesthetics is categorized, or that could be categorized as alternative, which shouldn't be like that. And I also talked to my colleagues. Frau Dalian was pointing out that intercultural aesthetics, or maybe aging aesthetics, shouldn't be treated like alternative aesthetics, more than like a part of the part of the dance aesthetics. Or maybe it takes a while to get it translated, or maybe it shouldn't be translated, but at the same time, we need time.
Thank you so much. Is there,
just to add to that, was one of the things about the age studies was not about aging on the elder side, but age studies is all of us, and that was important. But what I wanted to bring up was, at one point I went up to the circle out there where you get all your information, and I said, oh, I'm so exhausted, and you put this panel next to that panel, and now what am I going to do? And they said, we did that on purpose. And I realized that it's a little bit like, I want to, in a sense, praise borders, because I think, and praise how I have to leap over things, and so if something's obstructed in my head, I have to use my energy, my delirium, in a sense, to overcome it. And I want to thank them for, and I think a Congress makes me do that. I mean, I have incredibly new ideas. I have things broken apart that still hurt. And last night I ran into Faustin in my hotel, and he says it's been the most incredible time at the conference because of what I went through for the performance. So for him, it was a healing process to be here. But it was because of the border, because of the tension, and then the delirium, that we move. And dance does that really well.
I have two more cards. It is just a play of chance, I would say, and I read them. And first, the one on how is the body of the researcher implicated in the production of meaning? So now we have to think, or not to think, but to move, I would say. Yes. You would say it's a theme for the next Congress, perhaps?
But I think the body is always implicated immediately. Yeah. That's the first thing that is implicated, is the body of the researcher somehow, right? So that will be my immediate answer to that. And then we can go more into details, but do you want to say something?
Well,
Go ahead. No, no, no.
No.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, we all have our themes, obviously. So, again, you know, kind of returning to the question of the racialization of the body and performance. I mean, I've done a lot of research on the racialization of the spectator's gaze, and that's really starting with my own gaze. And at a certain point, and I can tell you exactly when it was, it's when I saw Bill T. Jones last night at Uncle Tom's Cabin, The Promised Land. And I guess that was in the early 90s in Chicago. And some of you maybe saw it at some point, or others of you probably have seen the documentary, but in that sort of last scene where everyone gets naked, well, everyone, you know, kind of progressively strips. And then all of a sudden, you know, I mean, I'm kind of embarrassed that I have to acknowledge this, but I'll follow your example, Sabina. And, you know, so all of a sudden it's like you see, oh, in the US, there are body tones, skin tones that go sort of from light beige to dark brown. So when did we start saying black and white? And this was when I had, my older son was 5 years old in kindergarten and asked me one night if we were black. That was interesting. No, he asked me if we were white, excuse me. He asked me, are we white? And I said to him, what does that mean to you? And he said, that means that we're the people who would never be sold into slavery. There's a whole other story behind that story. But just to sort of, again, I'm embarrassed that I was, you know, well into my adulthood before I began to understand the construction of my own whiteness in American culture and began to understand the construction of the whiteness of the modern dance canon, and then began to kind of write about that. So yes, the body of the researcher is utterly implicated.
Yeah. And as well the sex, so to rethink or to talk or implicate questions about that as well. Yeah.
Can I say just one more thing?
You should.
Thank you. But I think the marriage between the body of a researcher and the body of a practitioner is very important, because there are things that I can't do, or I can't, like it's literally like there are, I feel that my practice, and I say this all the time, but every practice, and if you're doing a serious practice, you're trying to turn a stone, one specific stone. You want to just turn it around. And if you have somebody else who's also turning the same stone or a similar stone, then it just makes it so much, I mean, it sounds like a cliche that it's so much easier. But the thing is, but we need to talk. We need to have these, because there was I'm coming from a time when I didn't have anybody talking about these things. The stone that I wanted to turn, so to speak. There was nobody researching or writing or, and then it was like the stone was only in my head. You know, it was like, is there a stone? You know, or am I imagining it? But when this whole scholarship started, and people like Avanti and Devesh and all these people started writing about it, then I said, wow, you know, I'm not imagining these things. In the beginning, you just intuit them. So, so I think the body of the researcher also feels maybe the same thing, to turn something and turns it in his or her own way, and helps another kind of a turning. And maybe it's, of course, it's reciprocal. It has to be, yeah. But it's so important to not just, you know, be vertical, but.
Sabine.
Yeah, isn't it Vivekananda who says there's different types of yoga? Because as I was sort of trying to write my book at the Interweaving colleague, and you're just sitting there all day, you know, trying very hard to think about the dancing body. You feel so disconnected from the dancing body in a way. But then I think I was actually reading Vivekananda and thinking about yoga and how that also influences a lot of contemporary dance practices. And what it is trying to get to the heart, you know, what is the heart of that? And that's about realizing something about yourself, but also something that's ultimately bigger than that. And whichever way you choose to get there, whether that's through thinking or writing or dancing, are forms of yoga. But maybe, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I thought, to me, it then kind of made sense that whatever path you choose, if you're rigorous about it, then yes, your body is implicated, but you're also trying to connect to a mind, a body-mind that's bigger than that. Yeah. And so in that sense, it's also, I guess, how the researcher's body is implicated in trying to find some truth that will be redefined again. But I think the search is something that connects us across borders perhaps as well.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps, thank you, Sabine, it's not only their body in a singular, because it's perhaps really as well that as a dancer and as a scholar and as a researcher, and so there are always, if we say a multiple body, it's just a formula, but everyone knows that we are in different parts and in different, we have different ways of being attentive, where or whatever, and this is the turning the stone, but it means that it's not only body singular. And perhaps this could be an important issue in thinking, writing, moving, because can we talk without moving? Sitting here, or write, or think? And so, yeah, for me this is always a very, very important question. And even if this is not part of our research on our own or on the others, so that I even know there is a project on gestures in talking and speaking, and which movements are part of our talking and building metaphors, and are there gestural metaphors. So this is, yeah.
But the body is not only movement, right? So, and I was thinking, the body doesn't necessarily is isomorphic to movement, and I was thinking also in the previous talk, there was this proposition that every dance piece, every individual singular work requires a specific, or proposes a way of dramaturging it, right? It's as if for every work you have to restart your method of dramaturging, your method of choreography, your collaborators. We know this, right? And I was thinking that every research requires a kind of preparation of the body for the researcher, right? And sometimes, you know, with the case of the Brazilians that I'm doing right now, it's a historical, it's very new for me because I don't do historical research, right? And my preparation for the archive is a very different one than the preparation to be researching something that I've seen live. I know that for sure, right? So there's a kind of education of the senses that is required for that specific, and that's quite interesting because again, it has to do with a kind of receptivity and a kind of activation of the senses, which seems very abstract, but actually I think there is a method for that. And so I wanted to say that it's not just movement, but a kind of ways in which you can incorporate the work that is already there, or the archive.
Yeah, and just one, and also the unrest that makes the researcher research is within the body of the, and also the satisfaction. These are very important. The satisfaction is we are thirsty for satisfaction, you know, and that's visceral. It's in the body.
Yeah, please, Phyllis.
Just a follow-up comment, really, to what Natej just said. I was going to offer something similar, which was because I both practice and write a lot. The inner movement of thought is what moves the fingers, and the corporeal, sensual nature of the thought appearing is a very embodied experience that if we open our sensitivities to it, is present, can be present to us. So, yeah.
Yeah. Christina, perhaps one last.
Thank you so much. I proposed the question, and I think there's so much to be said, but I just wanted to put one thing. There is this German philosopher, Wilhelm Flusser. He has a whole body of work on gestures, and I just want to put this thought here because he said a lot of when we talk about our work, we use words such as I examine, to grasp, and on the one hand, on the other hand. So our thoughts are always connected to how we use the uses of our bodies. So, and he proposes that instead of thinking about the language of dance or the language of movement, that we think about the gesture of thinking, the gesture of this and that. So, just an open thought.
Thank you. Yeah, Wilhelm Flusser and his ideas of just extending the notion of gesture. Thank you so much. Yeah. I think we are at a point where we have to have a border, which is the nearly not yet, but nearly the end of the Congress. And since Sabine Gehm and Katharina van Wilke want to share with you a few last minutes, I just now end this panel and say thank you very much to those sitting here with me, and to Holger, Hartung and Christel Weiler, and all those who prepared it and made up the carpet, one could say, for our interweavings. So thank you. And please give me another applause. Give me another one just for Sabine and Katharina von Wilke, because it's really great what they're doing. Yeah. Thank you.